Good morning, my beautiful, blessed people, and welcome to day 51 of the Y.O.U live stream experience. I am that guy, although my daughter would say, you are not him, and you are not that guy. And for any parent of a 15-year-old, you know that means they secretly, possibly, maybe, almost certainly, definitely can see that you could be him, even if you're not quite him just yet. And also, and in the same way, if you have the audacity and the audaciousness to step out and try to be him or her or them or they, and you have a family surrounding you and watching you, particularly looking up at you, powerful possibility. Do you overlook that if you are a parent? That there are little creatures looking to mimic and resemble you. And so, in your pursuit of being him or her, especially if you're a him as a reflection for a her, guy dads, right? Guy for girls. I also have a son. It's a different thing, too. They are critiquing your himness and learning, ooh, when he does that, it does make him look like him. And then when he does that, he doesn't quite look like him. And then they learn from that. And that's going to be important for our conversation today. Ironically enough, and maybe not so ironically, not so much of a coincidence, because nothing is a coincidence. That's where my head is at. We're going to talk about sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice? And I don't know that this is going to be a standard message around sacrifice. At least I don't think it is, because in my journey to become him, I can't be like anyone else at sacrifice. I can't deliver the cliche, although I'm cliche Jeff, because then what am I really sacrificing? I'm not trying to be like nobody else. However, in the same way, we're all influenced. So maybe subconsciously I am. In any event, before I get all cryptic, what time is it? That's not what I said, Siri. What time is it? 4:35 a.m. Yes. My beautiful, blessed people. Systems check. Hydration. I started this off by putting on my medicated chapstick. And dun, 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 the Red Book of Stupendousness. It has some things in it that I wrote down because it wouldn't be the Y.O.U live stream experience if I didn't have the Red Book of Stupendousness. With things written down. With things written down. Before we get into the dialogue, my beautiful, blessed people, do you believe you're beautiful and blessed? How are you doing? I said I would try to do this every day. How are you doing? Presuming you're not having the greatest day whenever this makes it to you, assuming this even makes it to you. It's okay to not have the greatest day and still feel beautiful and blessed. It's okay to maybe possibly wake up transitioning from a very difficult day the day prior and have hope that today will not be as difficult as yesterday and that we could have better tomorrows. So how are you doing? Are you feeling beautiful and blessed? If you can identify and align with being beautifully blessed, look around and accept all that allows you to feel beautifully blessed. Look inside and appreciate all that allows you to feel beautifully blessed. Listen to the words and the power of being beautifully blessed and aligning with that. And again, if you're not there, then let these words be an opportunity for you. Don't take it as coincidence that the message of being beautifully blessed can apply to you, all of you, any of you, wherever you are, however you are. Because the alternative is, of course, you don't feel that way. And why? I'm settling in emotionally, you know, trying to figure out along this journey the improvement process, the daily improvement process. Don't be hypocritical, Jeff. Do you feel beautiful? Do I feel beautifully blessed? I'll answer that question for you. Yes. And I feel beautifully blessed because we're going to talk about sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice? And me being here is an obvious sacrifice. But what am I sacrificing? I'm sacrificing everything. Straight up. I'm sacrificing everything in a way that, let's look at the obvious exposure. I ask this question regularly, right? Who am I? Who am I? And until society defines me as him, imagine that I could pursue this and sacrifice myself with the belief and the expectation, whether I say it aloud or not, whether I understand that if I do that in the manifestation process, that could make or break me because we shouldn't have any expectations. So in that way, I'm just doing what God is asking me to do. And because I believe in the latter versus the former, well, then I'm sacrificing everything. I'm sacrificing everything because I don't really know quite in the detail I think I need to know it in the depth and brevity allowed to understand himness. Who am I really? That goes to my head. And that's a massive psychological and emotional sacrifice that I could venture out to proceed in a direction with full faith. That's what we talk about with faith. I'm willing to sacrifice all that comes with the pursuit of excellence in a specific direction with hope and faith that it'll work out. That's a sacrifice. Knowing that I could plan, knowing that I can make progress, and I could still somehow, in a way, at least how we would define ways, that I wouldn't make it to where I'm trying to go. Imagine that. Imagine that we could willingly, on an emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical level, create a life of sacrifice in all phases I just referenced that allow us the ability to sacrifice, that we could feel the sacrifice. Pick a sacrifice, any sacrifice that I'm trying to reflect right now. 3:30 a.m. is a sacrifice. Sitting and praying with God, not in the traditional biblical sense, but conversing with God. Have you given yourself that opportunity to sacrifice in that way? Can you be vulnerable enough to have conversation and dialogue with God? We might think we are, but I'm talking about if I can get on the mic day 51 and fear, well, what am I going to say? That goes to my head. And then there's a relief and a release that after this sacrifice, however long I go, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, a gazillion hours, that when I'm done, I got through another one. Try conversing with God regularly. Because at some point, you will ask the question, what am I going to say to God today? And then understand that there's a sacrifice in however you might believe in deity and greatness and the power of God, that you might presume God knows all. But the way I view it, the sacrifice is God sees all because God witnesses through me. You get what I'm trying to say? In that way, I talk regularly. You can't G up God. You can't fake God. There's nothing. God knows all. Why? Because I believe, right? This is my sacrifice for belief and faith. God witnesses through me. God experiences through me. There's reciprocity in the spiritual process, in the faith and belief of God, creator of all. And so in that way, because God has already witnessed all and God has witnessed all through me, what do I say to God? How deep are you willing to go in your conversation with God to have the willingness to sacrifice all you truly feel? Create dialogue where there's not just this acceptance, there's questioning. Have you ever even considered that as a possibility? That you could sacrifice within yourself enough to fully humble yourself before God and question and know that while God is witnessing and providing for you, because you have free will and your free will is being delivered to you as you move and as you accept whatever life it is you're accepting, whether you're improving every day or not, that you could pivot and say, you know what? I'm going to have a different experience through God. And so therefore, because I'm going to have a different experience through God, I'm going to make sacrifices that maybe God didn't really realize you were going to make. Imagine that. Are you willing to sacrifice that level of thought and power? Yes, God witnesses, but God knows there's many different paths. Could you make a path and a pivot that God is like, ooh, okay, I feel you. I understand now. I will deliver you now on this new journey and this new endeavor. Do you have the audacity to think like that, to sacrifice in that way and have those critical conversations? So waking up at 3:30 is a sacrifice. Sitting down and praying and being still, having a conversation with God is a sacrifice. Drinking cold water at 4 o'clock in the morning is a sacrifice in order to hydrate, right? Writing down what I think I'm going to write. All these things, we look at it, I don't want to say superficially, but on the surface, to understand that there are details around the improvement process that are non-negotiable and obvious that you must sacrifice in a way that doesn't even really need to be said. It is a sacrifice to get up earlier. No shit. Why don't you do it? If you don't, it's because you're not willing to sacrifice in that way. It is a sacrifice to not just get up, but have a plan for what you're going to do day to day. Imagine that some of us have sacrificed so much that we don't believe that there's a plan we should have every day, that we don't schedule our time. And what are you sacrificing? That's another reality. Do you realize that when you don't sacrifice, when we don't sacrifice, when it's not an intentional sacrifice, moment to moment to moment, when we don't own the moment, we're then sacrificing the ownership of the moment, thereby releasing our power and authority of our moments. Which means what? You're sacrificing either way, consciously or unconsciously. There's a subconscious factor. There's the ability to make a sacrifice to rewire, reprogram, and rededicate yourself subconsciously. There's also the reality that when you go to sleep, you're knocked out, you're unconscious. Yo, think about what I'm saying. If you're not making conscious sacrifice, you have an unconscious sacrifice to release authority over your life. This is what improvement is about every day. The everyday, day to day, how could you wake up and not understand that you're blessed and beautiful regardless of what you have and don't have? Have you not come to that realization? Can you not sacrifice the superficial, the material, the esoteric, the outside, perceptual, doesn't really mean anything when you're left alone and it's just you? Sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice? And I encourage and urge to please consider the possibility that I am just nobody and I mean nothing and can mean absolutely nothing to you and anyone else ever. But if you but take a brief moment as a standard to a standard. Maybe I'm a substandard in your view. Whatever. I'll accept that. And you are already sacrificing. And are you willing to accept that you are, that you have, and that you can make a sacrifice to no longer sacrifice as you're sacrificing if it doesn't align with who you want to be? That's all. Have you considered to even make that conscious sacrifice? That you are not being who you want to be for yourself and that maybe you've never even gave that a thought. Give me a second. All right. I wrote this down. It's time for the Red Book of Stupendousness. Is that what I called it today? I don't know. Are you willing to sacrifice? We have to appreciate and come to consciousness and the reality that sacrifice is the acceptance of radical change. We want to improve every day. There are easy ways to improve daily, inclusive of just beginning to start to think about how you think about what you think about, right? And that's deeper and broader and more vast than we might initially understand and appreciate, because the reality is we've likely gone a lot of time without thinking about what we're thinking about and how we think about things. Fair. So sacrifice has to align with defining radical change for ourselves. Radical change. What is it? Where are you? And the possibility that where you are, in order to get to where you possibly want to go, in order to improve in the way that you could improve, to the lengths at which you can improve, could mean everything must change. That's radical. That's also very difficult and would totally align with the concept of ultimate sacrifice. Because think about what that means. The acceptance that you are somewhere and you could be very far along, at least relative in how we measure time. Forget 20s and 30s, 40s, I'm in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There's no excuse. The types of things people are doing in their 80s, 90s, and even up to 100 is amazing. If you haven't been willing to sacrifice enough to follow people who do things at that age, in that age group, fine. Don't make a radical change. In any event, the perception that you could have experience and wisdom and comfort in the life you've created, and then somehow believe you need to change because you want to start to improve, and that realization of improvement means a full 180 on your life. That's radical change. That you could be, and to an extent, maybe some of you are successful. I promise you, on the surface, if you read my life resume, you'd be like, pretty good. Pretty good. You've gotten pretty far in your career. You've made some huge jumps. You've made some huge strides. You have a lot of things surfacey that align with, wow, you got a pretty successful life. You would even almost probably tell me, shut the fuck up, Jeff. Don't do nothing to ruin this for you. That's a really real sacrifice. I think about that. So my sacrifice is to realize, well, wow, I have done some pretty good things. And guess what? In all the things I've done to be good along the way, a lot of missteps, my friends. A lot of, I could be even further. That's a realization. But that also comes with the radicalness of understanding we don't always maximize because we don't know. We don't know until we experience. Without experience, what do we really know? So we make sacrifice, we take risks, and sometimes the risks work out to an extreme. Sometimes they work out to an extreme. You know what I mean? So in that way, are you willing to come to the realization that you are somewhere and all of it could need to change? That's radical. What I think is of significant importance when we discuss the word sacrifice and radical change, I don't use the word sinful a lot because sinning to me, the way that it has been introduced in Western culture, Catholicism, and biblical culture, the idea that we're born sinners, it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't know that I align with that theory. Judge me, criticize me. I read the book. I'm reviewing, and I'm in the process of reading another book. It's called God Has a Name, which is a review sort of a lot of these principles and analogies or concepts. I'm not saying we don't sin. I think we need to make mistakes. I'll say again, everything about wisdom is experience. How else do you experience without making an attempt to learn? And in that way, sometimes you make mistakes. Does that make you a sinner? Well, there's some things we could argue that are obviously wrong and egregious. The world offers that regularly. And the obviousness of sin, fine. We get those things. And we have processes of punishment in place for people who are obvious sinners. But what I'm trying to drive here is also the reality and possibility of, if you haven't made the requisite sacrifice for your life, that should be inclusive of radical change, then it is sinful to continue on the path that has gotten you to where it's gotten you, which could be the path to exactly nowhere. To which I also said, it's sinful to continue a tradition of suffering through self-inflicted punishment. Think about those words, right? It is sinful to continue a tradition of suffering through self-inflicted punishment. What could that possibly mean? I then said this: radical change means radical sacrifice. Could we be, I almost want to say emotionally mature, or remove all emotions to have an honest conversation about a lot of the difficulties, a lot of the sufferance is self-inflicted. So there are words in the Bible, and that God is, and as Yahweh, however you identify, has said that for sinners, they'll suffer all the way through third and fourth generations. And this really hit me. And it lends you to start to believe that I'm suffering because of the sins of my father and my father's father and my father's, presuming you even know who your father is, right? But in that way, watch this now. As someone who is a bastard child, so to speak, my father bounced early. I know who he is. I can reach out to him right now and text him. But he wasn't in my life at all. And let's just presume, with respect, God bless, I hope this doesn't make it to him in a way where, I'm chastising. It's just his life, whatever. But you look at it on the surface and you might say, oh, I'm suffering from my father's sins. He did all these things, and because of that, my life is more difficult. Of course it is. If we haven't figured it out already, as someone who is now raising children, that I struggle and say, well, what should I do as a father? I didn't really have a father to teach me what to do as a father. So in that way, I could suffer for the sins of my father, whereas one of the sins of my father was that he wasn't there. He didn't provide oversight. He didn't introduce me to the wisdom of fatherhood. And so I can make mistakes that I wouldn't otherwise know because why? I didn't have no one to teach me. So we can agree that in that way, there's a level of sin that has been passed down to me due to my father's absence. I get that. It's logical. I can reason with you and say, my beautiful people, my beautiful, blessed, and wonderful people. If you are without a father, a mother, if you were low on the financial scale, all those things, right? You've gone through tragedy, all those things, the sufferance from the sins of your family and others around you, You inherit that. Absolutely 1,000%, unequivocally, undeniably, unambiguously. It has an impact. If you haven't given, you want to talk about having a conversation with God. Talk to God about, yo, why did I have to experience some of these things? Why couldn't I have a little bit more of a rosier outlook? Or why can't I could have had a little more of a traditional background that allowed me the sustenance and the stability to elevate myself? Why did I have to start so much from the bottom? That's what it comes down to. I suffer the transgressions of my family, of what wasn't given to me. It actually pushes us lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, which makes it harder and harder and harder and harder and harder just to see the light. The reality of the tradition of sin in our family is that we have become so deep and pushed into darkness, we don't even understand what light is anymore. I give you that. I appreciate that. I understand that. To which I asked the question, at what juncture does it then become self-inflicted punishment? At what point do you cut the cord and say, well, I got to make a sacrifice? Because the beauty allowed in generational curses and generational sin and generational transgressions is that it is clear and obvious if you do and repeat the same thing that's been shown to you, well, what do you expect to get? If I were to do what my father did, what would I expect to get? This is not an indictment. It's not to suggest that there's anything even wrong. Maybe it was a blessing for me. I can see it that way. Maybe if I had the traditional setting, maybe I'd be lesser. Maybe I'd be less inclined to make sacrifice. I probably almost certainly maybe wouldn't be here. Maybe. I don't know. How would I know? I wouldn't. That's why we talk about the bravado and the arrogance to believe that you know for certainty what it is and what it isn't, especially based on what you know and what you don't know, or what you don't know and what you think you know because of what you don't know. You won't know. That's a sacrifice. To come to the acceptance and realization that, all right, fine. I could dream of this other possibility, but it's gone. My G, my people, my beautiful, blessed people. All you know is what it is. Accept it. If you carry it forward, it's self-inflicted. If you do as you were told, and you do as you were taught, and you do as you were shown, and you look and you're like, I wouldn't have done it that way. But then you wind up in the same situation, in the same spot. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What does that suggest and say? That you've made no sacrifice. How could you consider that you've made a sacrifice if you're exactly where everything has been generation after generation after generation, and somehow you believe it's not self-inflicted? Of course it's self-inflicted. It is all on you. Releasing that power means that you have no control. Why do we have to talk about this every day? I don't know. It comes out of my mouth every day. Why? Maybe there's a fear of mine that I could release my sacrifice and therefore still be making a sacrifice that I have no control over what I'm and how I'm sacrificing. Self-inflicted punishment. Radical change means radical sacrifice. If you're like me, it is likely, possibly, almost assuredly, definitely has shown to you what not to do. Use it to your advantage. Use it to your advantage. Make a radical sacrifice. To which along the same lines I wrote down, it is very likely that it is within you, in your DNA, your code, your buildup, to be generationally weak. Man, it's unfortunate. And this is not a matter of fortune. And this is not a matter of, again, right or wrong. This is a matter of logic and reality. And sacrificing what that means emotionally. And sacrificing what that means for difficulty. Is it not difficult either way? And then you presume, again, that those who have it better and have a higher launch point for which to work off of, maybe have more of a silver spoon, that they have it better. Why? Do they? You don't know. How would you know? You didn't live that life. It's selfish to consider that somebody else has it better or worse or more or less because of what you think you see perceptually. I feel blessed that I had it the way I had it. I feel blessed that no one was there. I feel blessed that the sacrifice that was made was to sacrifice all the things that should have been, should have. That's another thing. Well, you presume family hierarchy and structure, certain people should be there. They weren't. All right, cool. That sacrifice was made. I learned massively from it. I'll say this as much as I can, including in my professional career. My professional career took off when I had a boss that showed me exactly what not to do. A lot of us get into the situation where we're restricted, held down, and suppressed by a boss like that. The big bad boss. We know those bosses. They pick a form, any form of social media. Everybody talks about it. My boss. Yeah, but they just taught you what not to do. That is great wisdom and knowledge. I love seeing what not to do. I love that sacrifice. Thank you for sacrificing for me and showing me not the way. You get what I'm saying? I talked about this slightly in detail. We got to ask the question, are you willing to sacrifice? Depending on where you're at, you could have, and I talked about being suppressed and pushed into darkness. We could have a low exposure to light. And life is awfully complex, regardless of the hand you were dealt, even more so when you have low exposure to light. What does it mean to have low exposure to light? When we have low exposure to light, we have low exposure to the type of sacrifices it takes towards the continual growth through sacrifice. Is that not fair, reasonable, and logical? If we look at our environment and our surroundings, and it is one that is suppressed and dark and inclusive of the sacrifice to not sacrifice, and thereby releasing the power of sacrifice, then we have low exposure to light. And low exposure to light keeps us blocked off from the potentiality of the sacrifice towards continued improvement, continued growth. However, and in that way, at some juncture, the reality check has to come. We have to sacrifice to make radical change and no longer allow ourselves to be punished through self inflicted choices to the detriment of our being. Now, we can ask the question, how are you feeling? Do you believe you're beautifully blessed? And that you can answer that with great conviction, even if you're having a bad day. That's sacrifice. That even if you think God is against you, imagine that. I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. It's just about free will. Can you appreciate the free will of the world we live in? And with free will comes sacrifice that some things aren't going to go the way we want it to go, and that some evil is going to percolate and permeate and reveal itself. Why? Because some people are just terrified. Some people are so fearful of the sacrifice it requires to make the choices it takes to live a certain life of ethic and virtuousness and morality. And the reality to that is the more that we're shown that we can achieve success through the sacrifice of what will be determined evil ways, and the ease at which that appears to come, and the luxury with which it appears to offer, awfully complex, particularly when we have low exposure to light. So when the life presents itself to you that you think you want in a way that says you have to sacrifice, and you might have to sacrifice your soul. Guess what? You got to sacrifice your soul either way. But what are you sacrificing your soul towards? This is why the immediacy versus the long term, instant gratification versus delayed. It becomes awfully difficult when you're inundated with sacrifice of, you see, you're not where you're supposed to be today. You see, you don't have. You see, you're worse than. You see, you're less than. You see, you're not good enough. Imagine that you're pounding yourself with that every single day. So when you see that and you feel like you're being sacrificed, what are your alternatives? You look for the easy way. You stop sacrificing in faith. You stop sacrificing with the conviction of everything I have is all that I need. And because all I need is all I have, I'm good. even if it doesn't look like everything else, and even if it doesn't look like what I may actually want if I wrote it down on paper. Hey, this is the life I want. I used to have a friend, we were trying to do things together in the music space. And what a blessed and beautiful soul. And I miss the relationship sometimes. There's certain things, talk about sacrifice. I don't have a lot of people I can relate to in that way anymore. I just have had to sacrifice whatever it is, what it is. I'm not looking for what's the word? Sympathy or anything like that. But he and I had this vision and these visions of grandeur. We were we were searching for an opportunity in the music space. And we would meet every day and we would talk every day and we would think every day and dream every day. And I can think about those conversations now and see it and still summon up the the feeling of the possibility. We were in our early 20s. That was over 2 decades ago now. And if I had continued on that path, it's not to suggest that I would have, but if I would have continued, clearly I'm not there. But my point to it is he had this paper that he would pull out, and it was a folded sheet of paper, and he was drawing the house he was gonna buy. It was like a mansion. And it was, if you think of this paper, it was about folded up and about this wide. That's how big the house was that he was drawing for himself. But you think about that level of soul searching. That's you're searching with your soul because there's something in your soul that tells you you could attain. And we draw out what we're going to attain in material. I don't know if it's natural. I don't know if centuries ago this is what people did. It has to be in some way, because how else will we have this luxurious world? The world is luxurious. Think about all the amenities this world offers and the beauty that's around us and all the way that the beauty is around us. The life is, and this is why we strive, right? Because why? The idea of all that beauty is beautiful. It just is. It encapsulates us. It engulfs us. We feel like we should get it. But of course, it comes with sacrifice. But I think back to how he would draw this beautiful idea, and it was less about the fact that it was a mansion. It was more about what it meant to get there. It was more about knowing that if that were to come to fruition, it means that everything else along the way came to fruition. That's sacrifice. What are we sacrificing for? What are we sacrificing for? Can you see? Can you draw? Can you vision? Can you become what you think is worth sacrificing for? Have you stopped thinking about what is worth sacrificing for? It's difficult. It's all difficult. I don't know how to say it any other way than it's a sacrifice regardless. It just is. And fortunately or unfortunately, your time to sacrifice eventually fizzles out. And God forbid, eventually, if it doesn't just fizzle out because your time stops, you could put yourself in a situation where you have nothing left to sacrifice because you've put yourself in such a predicament that you have nothing left to give to sacrifice. That's scary. That you could possibly have so much more time, but you have made the sacrifice to not sacrifice, thereby sacrificing your body, your mind, and your spirit in a way that it debilitates you. And then even if you came to the reason in your mind to say, I'm going to make a sacrifice, you may not be able to. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's not guaranteed. And then it goes, man. I don't know.